The sun hung lazily in the late afternoon sky, casting a golden glow over the manicured lawns of Maplewood Estates. For years, this quiet little neighborhood had been Jamie Carter's sanctuary, a place where mornings began with the chirping of birds and evenings settled in with the soft hum of crickets. Today, Jamie was tending to the garden behind their modest home, carefully watering the rows of petunias and marigolds that lined the backyard fence. The air was warm, but not stifling, carrying the faint scent of freshly mown grass and blooming jasmine from the neighbor's yard. Jamie paused, a smile curling at the corner of their lips. This was the peace they had craved when moving here 5 years ago. A peaceful refuge from the chaos of city life. But then came the faint sound of footsteps. Soft, deliberate, and out of place. Jamie stiffened, eyes darting toward the tall wooden fence that separated their property from the neighbors. At first, they thought it might be the family cat, but the noise was heavier, more purposeful. A shadow moved just beyond the fence line. Heart rate picking up, Jamie quietly set down the watering can and crept toward the window, peering through the curtains. The sight made the blood run cold. There, just a few feet inside Jamie's backyard, stood their next-door neighbor, Greg Donovan. Greg was a man known in the community as quiet but stubborn, a man who often clashed with others over trivial matters. But today, he wasn't just at the fence. He was striding across Jamie's freshly planted flower bed, boots leaving muddy prints over the delicate petals. Jamie's throat tightened. "Greg!" they called out softly, trying to keep their voice steady. Greg didn't look up. Instead, he bent down, pulling at the branches of the small apple tree Jamie had carefully nurtured for years. Twigs snapped under his grip. "What are you doing on my property?" Jamie demanded, stepping outside, their voice stronger now. Greg straightened up, a cold, calculating look in his eyes. "Just taking care of some trimming. Your tree's blocking the sidewalk," he said dismissively. Jamie blinked in disbelief. "That's not your decision to make, and you never asked." Greg shrugged as if it were a trivial matter. Neighbors help each other out, don't they? But Jamie saw through the veneer of friendliness. Greg's tone held an edge, a hint of something more sinister, lurking beneath the surface. They had exchanged polite nods at community meetings, but this was different. This was an invasion. "I want you off my property now," Jamie said, stepping forward, fists clenched. Greg smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that whispered trouble was brewing. "Relax. I'm just trying to help. You're overreacting." Jamie felt a knot tighten in their stomach. The peaceful neighborhood they loved was shifting beneath their feet, and Greg's trespass was just the beginning. As Greg bent down again, Jamie noticed something else. A set of muddy footprints leading up to the small pond near the back fence. The pond was a delicate ecosystem Jamie had painstakingly maintained, and it was clearly marked with signs warning of the slippery edges. Greg's boots were perilously close to the water's edge. Jamie's voice cracked. "Greg, please be careful. That pond is dangerous." Greg waved the warning off, his focus fixed on pruning a bush by the fence, completely ignoring the danger. Jamie's heart pounded as a sudden breeze rustled the leaves. For a moment, all was still, and then, without warning, Greg's foot slipped on the slick grass. His arms flailed as he lost balance. "Greg!" Jamie shouted, rushing forward. The neighbor plunged into the pond with a heavy splash, water churning around him. Jamie's world spun in an instant, calm shattered by chaos. The cold shock of the pond water was the first thing Greg Donovan felt as he flailed beneath the surface, panic roaring in his chest. For a split second, time seemed to slow. The ripples on the water's surface the desperate grasping of his hands, the stunned expression on Jamie's face. Jamie didn't hesitate. Without thinking, they dove in, the water swallowing them briefly before their arms found Greg's flailing body. Pulling with all their strength, Jamie managed to haul him out onto the soggy grass, coughing and gasping for breath. "Are you okay?" Jamie asked, heart hammering, eyes wide with shock. Greg coughed harshly, but managed a shaky nod. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little wet." But Jamie wasn't convinced. His face was pale, his hands trembling. Still, Greg pushed himself up, wiping mud from his shirt, as if embarrassed by the spectacle. "I told you the pond was dangerous," Jamie said, voice tight but concerned. Greg sneered, brushing off Jamie's words like a bothersome fly. "If you'd taken care of that mess, I wouldn't have fallen in." Jamie's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "That pond is clearly marked. I've kept it safe and clean." Greg crossed his arms, stepping closer. "Maybe if you weren't so busy babysitting your garden, you'd notice how your property is a hazard to the neighborhood." The accusation hit like a slap. Jamie's mind raced. Was this neighbor really turning this around? Making themselves the victim after trespassing and nearly drowning? Before Jamie could respond, Greg's voice dropped low. "Dangerous. You better watch yourself, Jamie. This isn't over." The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. Jamie stared as Greg turned and stalked back across the lawn, again, ignoring the boundaries, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. Broken branches, crushed flowers, muddy footprints. The peaceful backyard was no longer a refuge. It had become a battleground. Over the next few days, the intrusion escalated. Greg showed up unannounced, always finding new ways to encroach. He planted weeds along the fence line, threw cigarette butts near Jamie's garden beds, and even attempted to remove a fence post, claiming it was leaning into his yard. Jamie documented everything, photos, notes, and videos, but every confrontation with Greg left them feeling more exhausted and powerless. Neighbors began to notice the tension. Some whispered behind Jamie's back. Others avoided the topic altogether. The HOA board remained conspicuously silent, unwilling or unable to intervene. One afternoon, as Jamie returned from work, they found a threatening note slipped under their door. "Next time, it won't be just a fall. Stay out of my way." A chill ran down Jamie's spine. Was Greg willing to escalate beyond property disputes? And why was the HOA turning a blind eye? Jamie reached out to the board, seeking support. The response was polite but vague, a reminder to handle neighborly disagreements amicably, and a suggestion to avoid escalating conflicts. Jamie felt trapped. The very community that promised harmony seemed to be siding with the aggressor, or at least refusing to protect the victim. One evening, while reviewing the security footage from their outdoor camera, Jamie noticed something unsettling. Greg, late at night, sneaking onto the property again. Not just once, but multiple times over several weeks. Why was he so determined to invade Jamie's space? The answer eluded Jamie, but the growing sense of danger was undeniable. Then came the day that shattered everything. A day when Greg's reckless disregard for boundaries nearly turned deadly again. Jamie had barely slept the night before, haunted by the threatening note and the unsettling images from the security camera. Every shadow outside seemed to hold a threat, every creak of the fence a warning. Yet when morning arrived, they forced themselves to carry on. There were flowers to water, the lawn to mow, and the fragile peace to maintain. That afternoon, Jamie was working near the pond again, meticulously clearing fallen leaves and debris. The little pond was a quiet oasis, home to koi fish and water lilies. carefully designed and maintained over years. Jamie had even posted several warning slippery edges signs around it, hoping to prevent accidents. But despite all precautions, the neighborhood had recently become a tinderbox, and Greg Donovan was the spark threatening to ignite it all. As Jamie wiped the sweat from their brow, a sudden noise shattered the calm. A loud crunching sound from the far side of the yard. Their heart slammed into their chest. Jamie spun around to see Greg, boots muddy and wet, standing dangerously close to the pond's edge. "Greg, get away from there!" Jamie yelled, rushing forward. Greg glanced over his shoulder, a mocking grin playing on his lips. "What, this little pond? It's no threat." Jamie's voice trembled with urgency. "It's slippery. You could fall. Please, step back." But Greg only laughed, stepping even closer. "I'm not a kid, Jamie. I know what I'm doing." Jamie's gaze darted to the warning signs, the freshly planted grass, the slick stones lining the water. Their instincts screamed at them to intervene, but Greg was stubborn, reckless, and dangerously close to disaster. Suddenly, Greg's foot slipped on a moss-covered rock. Time seemed to freeze. His arms flailed, grasping for balance. "Greg, no!" Jamie shouted, lunging forward. But it was too late. Greg plunged headfirst into the cold water, sending a splash high into the air. The serene pond erupted into chaos. For a moment, Greg's head disappeared beneath the surface. Panic surged through Jamie as they scrambled down the bank, fingers clawing at the muddy edge. "Hold on! I'm coming!" Jamie cried, reaching into the water. But Greg was thrashing wildly, disoriented and gasping for air. His arms flailed, accidentally pushing Jamie back as they tried to grab him. Jamie's heart pounded in their ears. Could they save him? Was Greg going to drown in their backyard because of their pond? With a surge of adrenaline, Jamie lunged, grabbing Greg's arm and pulling him toward the shore. They hauled him out onto the grass, coughing and sputtering, water streaming from his hair. "Stay with me, Greg. You're okay now," Jamie said, shaking him gently but firmly. Greg coughed one last time, his face pale but alive. Jamie collapsed. Beside him, their breath ragged, relief washing over them like a wave. But that relief was short-lived. Greg looked up at Jamie with eyes full of something that chilled them to the bone. Not gratitude, but cold accusation. "You should have had warning signs everywhere," Greg hissed. "You're responsible if anything happened." Jamie blinked, stunned. "I do have warning signs, and you trespassed." Greg's expression twisted into a sneer. "I'm filing a complaint, and you'll pay for this." Jamie's stomach dropped. How had saving someone's life turned into a nightmare of blame and threats? As Greg staggered to his feet and stormed off, Jamie knew one thing for sure. The battle was far from over. The quiet neighborhood was no longer safe, and they were about to be dragged into a legal war they never wanted. The day after the pond incident felt like a bad dream Jamie couldn't wake from. Their backyard, the very place that had once felt like a sanctuary, was now a battleground, scarred by muddy footprints, trampled flowers, and an invisible line of tension that stretched between their house and Greg Donovan's. Jamie tried to go about their morning routine, but every noise outside made them jump. When the mail arrived, they hesitated to open it, fearing what it might hold. Then, with a shaky hand, Jamie tore the envelope open. Inside was a letter from Greg's attorney. This letter serves as formal notification of our client's intent to pursue legal action against you for negligence and unsafe property conditions that led to his injury at the pond on your property. Jamie read the words over and over, disbelief turning to a cold wave of dread. The very person who had trespassed and nearly drowned on Jamie's property was now accusing them of wrongdoing. A knock at the door startled Jamie out of their thoughts. It was Mrs. Reynolds, an elderly neighbour who often stopped by with a plate of cookies or a warm smile. "Jamie dear, I heard about the accident," she said softly, glancing nervously around. "Are you all right?" Jamie forced a weak smile. "I'm fine, Mrs. Reynolds. Just shocked. Greg's blaming me." Mrs. Reynolds shook her head slowly. "It's strange. You always kept your yard in such good shape. And those signs by the pond, clear as day." Jamie nodded. "Exactly. I don't understand it. I saved him, and now he's turning this around on me." Mrs. Reynolds sighed. "People change when fear and anger take over. But remember, you're not alone. Some of us see what's really going on." Her words were a balm, but the weight of the looming lawsuit pressed heavier. Word spread quickly through the HOA community. Some neighbours whispered behind Jamie's back. Others offered quiet sympathy. The board, however, remained disturbingly silent. One afternoon, Jamie attended the HOA meeting, hoping for support. The room was filled with familiar faces, but the atmosphere was icy, charged with unspoken tension. When Jamie stood to speak, their voice barely above a whisper, the chairman cut them off. "This is a private matter between neighbours. The HOA encourages you both to resolve it amicably. No offers of mediation. No acknowledgement of Greg's trespassing or threatening behaviour." Jamie felt a swell of frustration and isolation. Back home, the situation worsened. Greg ramped up his provocations, dumping trash near Jamie's fence, revving his truck loudly late at night, and making veiled threats during encounters in the neighbourhood. Jamie kept a detailed journal, documenting every incident, every hostile exchange, but the weight of the ordeal was crushing. One evening, Jamie received an unexpected visitor. "Detective Harris from the local police department. We've had reports of ongoing harassment in your neighbourhood," he said, glancing around the dimly lit porch. "If you feel threatened, it's important to let us know." Jamie nodded, grateful but wary. "I'm trying to keep the peace, but Greg's getting worse. I'm worried." Detective Harris gave a grave nod. "We'll keep an eye out, and make sure to document everything." That night, Jamie lay awake, the shadows in their room seeming to close in. The man they'd once called a neighbour was now an adversary, weaponizing fear and lies. But Jamie was determined not to back down. If Greg wanted a fight, Jamie would be ready. Little did they know, the battle was about to escalate far beyond property lines, and the stakes were higher than they ever imagined. Jamie's world tilted the moment the thick envelope arrived. Official, stamped with the county court seal. Their hands trembled as they carefully opened it, eyes scanning the dense legal jargon, until the truth hit like a freight train. Greg Donovan had filed a lawsuit against them. Negligence. Unsafe property conditions. Damages. The words blurred together, but their meaning was clear. Jamie was being held responsible for Greg's near drowning in the pond. The letter demanded compensation and threatened court proceedings if Jamie didn't settle. Jamie reread the document in disbelief. How could the victim become the accused? How could Greg twist the story so completely, despite his clear trespassing and reckless behaviour? The news spread through Maplewood Estates faster than wildfire. By the next morning, whispers followed. Jamie everywhere. The mailman's cautious nod. The neighbours' averted gaze. Even the children's hushed conversations as they passed by. At the next HOA meeting, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Jamie stood alone at the podium, clutching the lawsuit papers, their voice steady but fierce. "This isn't just about property lines," Jamie said, scanning the crowd. It's about fairness, about truth. Greg's trespassing put him at risk, not the condition of my pond. The chairman cleared his throat, his expression unreadable. We encourage all parties to pursue resolution through legal channels. The HOA cannot interfere in active disputes. Jamie felt a sting of betrayal. The very community they had trusted was unwilling to support them. Or worse, silently siding with Greg to avoid drama. Back home, Jamie's phone buzzed relentlessly. Calls from attorneys, insurance agents, even journalists, who had caught wind of the neighborhood drama. The lawsuit had become a spectacle. Determined to fight back, Jamie hired a seasoned lawyer, Lisa Chen, known for defending homeowners in tricky HOA conflicts. Lisa reviewed the case with sharp eyes. Greg's claims are shaky at best. His own behavior, trespassing, ignoring warning signs, could be the key to your defense. But the HOA's silence worries me, Jamie admitted. If they don't back me, it feels like I'm on an island. Lisa nodded thoughtfully. We'll need to gather everything. Photos, videos, witness statements, and perhaps uncover if Greg's actions have a pattern. As the days passed, Jamie's life became a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and mounting stress. Greg continued his provocations, late-night noise, suspicious gatherings near Jamie's home, even vandalism to the garden. One night, Jamie returned to find their favorite rose bush, uprooted and crushed. The message was clear. Greg wasn't just seeking compensation. He was waging war. With Lisa's help, Jamie set up surveillance cameras around the property and reached out discreetly to neighbors who had witnessed Greg's erratic behavior. To Jamie's relief, a few neighbors finally stepped forward, some too afraid to speak publicly. Others tired of Greg's bullying. They shared stories of similar invasions, petty theft, and threats. Piece by piece, the narrative shifted. But just as Jamie felt hope rising, a new twist darkened the horizon. One afternoon, the HOA board sent Jamie a formal letter reminding them of community rules, fines for disturbing neighborhood harmony, and an ominous warning. Continued disruptions could lead to penalties. It was a clear message. Jamie's fight was unwelcome. With mounting pressure from all sides, Jamie faced a crushing question. How do you defend your home when the very community that should protect you seems determined to turn against you? The courtroom battle was looming, and the quiet neighborhood that had once promised safety was now a powder keg, ready to explode. The courthouse loomed over Jamie like a cold, unyielding fortress. On the morning of the first hearing, Jamie arrived, early, their heart pounding beneath the weight of 1,000 doubts and fears. The polished floors, the echoing halls, the stern faces of judges and lawyers. Everything felt surreal, like stepping into a battlefield they never wanted to enter. Beside Jamie stood Lisa Chen, calm and confident, clutching a thick binder of evidence. Photos of Greg's footprints across the flower beds, video clips of late-night trespassing, neighbor statements, and the countless warning signs posted around the pond. Greg entered the courtroom with his usual smug expression, flanked by his attorney, who wielded a stack of medical reports and the initial complaint-like weapons. The hearing began with opening statements. Greg's lawyer painted a picture of Jamie's negligence, claiming the pond was a hazardous trap, poorly maintained, and directly responsible for Greg's injury. They played clips of Greg struggling in the water, deliberately ignoring the fact that Greg had crossed the fence without permission. Jamie felt a surge of anger, but Lisa's steady hand on their shoulder was a grounding force. When it was their turn, Lisa methodically dismantled Greg's claims. She highlighted the trespassing, the clear signage, and the aggressive, dangerous behavior Greg had exhibited over months. The judge listened intently, occasionally glancing at the exhibits. But the courtroom drama was just one part of the unfolding storm. Back in Maplewood Estates, the lawsuit had splintered the community. Neighbors who once greeted Jamie with smiles now glanced away or whispered behind their back. Greg's supporters painted Jamie as the troublemaker, stirring doubts and dividing loyalties. Community meetings turned hostile. Heated arguments erupted over property rights, HOA responsibilities, and the definition of neighborly conduct. Jamie's mailbox was filled with anonymous notes, some offering support, others thinly veiled threats. One evening, Jamie's closest friend Marcus pulled them aside. "Jamie, you're not just fighting Greg anymore," Marcus said quietly. "The entire neighborhood's watching, and some people want you out." Jamie nodded, exhausted but resolute. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my home." Amid the chaos, unexpected allies emerged. A small group of neighbors, once silent, began organizing behind the scenes. They shared stories of Greg's past disputes, his aggressive tactics, and how the HOA had often ignored complaints about him. Their quiet courage bolstered Jamie's spirits, reminding them that they were not alone. Back in court, the judge scheduled mediation, an attempt to avoid a prolonged, costly trial. The mediation room was tense, the air thick with unresolved anger. Greg's demeanor was icy, refusing to admit fault. Jamie stood firm, armed with truth and evidence. Hours of negotiation passed, but no agreement was reached. As they left the courthouse, Jamie felt the weight of the battle pressing heavier than ever. The lawsuit was no longer just about the pond. It was about justice, community, and the right to protect one's home from invasion. With the trial date looming, Jamie braced for the fight of their life. But deep down, they knew one thing: the truth was on their side, and they would stop at nothing to defend it. The days leading up to the trial were a whirlwind of preparation, stress, and sleepless nights for Jamie. Lisa worked tirelessly, reviewing evidence and rehearsing courtroom strategies. Yet, amid the mounting pressure, an unexpected breakthrough was about to change everything. It started with an anonymous phone call to Lisa's office. The voice on the other end was hesitant but insistent. "I have something that might help Jamie Donovan's case," the caller said. "But I can't meet at the office. Too risky." Curious and cautious, Lisa arranged a discreet meeting at a local cafe. When the caller arrived, it was a woman Jamie vaguely recognized from the neighborhood. Mrs. Carlson, an elderly resident who had kept mostly to herself. "I've been watching Greg Donovan for months," Mrs. Carlson whispered, glancing around nervously. "He's not who he says he is." Lisa listened intently as Mrs. Carlson revealed a pattern of Greg's past, how he'd been involved in similar disputes in previous communities, always pushing boundaries, bullying neighbors, and leveraging lawsuits to intimidate. "What's more," Mrs. Carlson added, "I recorded some of his late-night visits to Jamie's yard, without permission, of course, but it shows his aggressive behavior." Lisa's eyes widened as Mrs. Carlson handed over a USB drive containing grainy but damning video footage. Greg lurking near Jamie's property, damaging plants, and even trying to disable the security cameras. Back at Jamie's home, the footage was a game changer. It painted a picture far from Greg's version of events, a neighbor intent on harassment, not victimhood. Lisa immediately filed a motion to introduce the new evidence in court, but the revelations also stoked the fires in the neighborhood. When the footage leaked, whether by accident or design, the community's reactions were explosive. Some neighbors expressed shock and began to openly support Jamie. Others remained loyal to Greg, accusing Jamie of staging the videos. The HOA board was forced to convene an emergency meeting to address the turmoil. Under pressure, the chairman finally spoke. The HOA does not condone harassment or trespassing by any member. We will be reviewing our policies and taking steps to ensure community safety. For the first time, Jamie saw a glimmer of hope. The HOA might actually stand behind them. But Greg was undeterred. Fueled by anger, he doubled down on his tactics. The night after the footage surfaced, Jamie found their garden gate slashed and a threatening message scrawled on their driveway. "You'll regret this." Fear and determination warred inside Jamie. They contacted the police, who increased patrols in the neighborhood and assured Jamie of their support. The trial date arrived, bringing with it a tense courtroom packed with neighbors, reporters, and family. When Lisa presented the new footage, the courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Greg's defense scrambled to discredit the evidence, but the judge ruled it admissible. The turning point had come. In the days that followed, Greg's aggressive facade began to crack under scrutiny. Witnesses testified about his patterns of intimidation. The HOA board, pressured by public outcry, initiated formal actions against Greg for multiple violations. Jamie's resolve hardened. The nightmare that had started with a single trespass was unraveling, revealing layers of deception and malice. But as the final hearing approached, Jamie couldn't shake a nagging feeling that the story wasn't over. That one last twist awaited, ready to turn everything upside down. The courtroom was packed to the brim. The morning of the final hearing, Jamie sat quietly, heart pounding but mind sharp. Lisa Chen's presence was a steadying force beside them, ready to guide through the last stretch of the battle. The air buzzed with anticipation. Neighbors, reporters, and even the HOA board members filled the seats, waiting to hear the verdict that had divided the community for months. Greg Donovan entered last, his face pale and drawn, his usual confident smirk replaced by a nervous glance. It was clear the tide was turning against him. As the hearing commenced, Lisa began by summarizing the mountain of evidence stacked against Greg. The trespassing videos, the history of intimidation, and Greg's own inconsistent testimony. Then, in a move that stunned everyone, Lisa revealed a new piece of evidence: correspondence between Greg and a third party, an unknown individual who appeared to be coaching Greg on how to manipulate the HOA and legal system to his advantage. The judge raised an eyebrow, requesting the letters be submitted into the record. Greg's attorney tried to object, but it was too late. The courtroom murmured in disbelief. Jamie's heart raced. The narrative that Greg had carefully constructed was crumbling before their eyes. Then came the moment of reckoning. The judge spoke with deliberate calm. After reviewing the evidence, it is clear that Mr. Donovan's injuries were the result of his own reckless and unauthorized behavior on Miss Donovan's property. Turning to Jamie, the judge added, "Furthermore, the court acknowledges the harassment and intimidation tactics used by Mr. Donovan, which are unacceptable within this community." The judge dismissed Greg's claims of negligence and ruled in favor of Jamie, ordering Greg to pay court costs and cease all contact with Jamie and their property. The courtroom erupted in quiet gasps and whispered conversations. Outside, the atmosphere was electric. Neighbors approached Jamie, some apologetic, others openly supportive. The small group that had quietly backed Jamie throughout now stepped forward proudly. The HOA board, under pressure, announced new policies to protect homeowners from harassment. and to enforce property boundaries strictly. But the most surprising twist came days later. Jamie received a call from the HOA chairman. "We want to formally apologize for the way the board handled your case," he said. "We've realized we need to do better. We'd like to invite you to join the HOA committee to help ensure this never happens to another neighbor." Jamie was stunned but humbled. The invitation was a sign of reconciliation and a chance to shape a safer, stronger community. As Jamie looked out at their once troubled backyard, the pond now calm and peaceful, they realized how much had changed. The battle had tested their strength, patience, and courage. It had exposed the dark undercurrents of fear and power that sometimes lurked beneath the surface of even the quietest neighborhoods. But it had also revealed something powerful: the resilience of a person standing up for what is right, the unexpected allies found in adversity, and the possibility of healing and growth after conflict. Jamie smiled softly, knowing the story wasn't just about a pond or a lawsuit. It was about home, and finally, it felt like home again.